Hello everyone, welcome back to Littleton Model Railway, and today I'm going to look at what's better, what are the advantages between new models and old models. So this chaos here is my collection, as some of my sons out in the background there. And I'm going to talk through So this here is my collection of locomotives, and I'm going to talk through the different ages that they are, what are the benefits, why have I bought these ones, what's good about them, what's bad about them, and what's worth looking out for and perhaps avoiding. So first up, what I believe is the oldest locomotive in my collection. This is by Triang. The benefits of this are, it was really cheap. It was, I think, £50, not really cheap, but it was cheap, 50 quid. It runs really well. It has a fantastic crawl. It can go very slow. Problems, and it's very simply detailed, so depending on your preference, that can be good or bad, so it lacks detail, which means it doesn't look very realistic, but also it's very hard to break. This is a sturdy locomotive. There's no lamp irons to break off. It's very simple inside, easy to take apart, repair, so great start for starting off with that. Old models, because they have lack in detail, you can clean them with a toothbrush. You can soapy water, take them apart, clean the shells with a toothbrush, obviously not the inside, you clean those properly. Drawbacks, so obsolete mechanisms. This has a magnet in here to magnetise the wheels so it sticks to the track because it only has one driven wheel. That means if you have this, you ideally need old track to go with it that is made of steel so that the magnet works and does its job. Although here this track isn't magnetised and it does run really smoothly without, although it just means that you may have some issues if you decide to hook it up to a long train. The other issue is the flanges are quite big, so it bumps on points. That can be an issue. So the old track is preferred for that. But if you have the old track, these are cheap. If you don't like detail because you're worried about breaking it, these are robust. If you're worried about repairing complicated mechanisms, these are very simple. But if you're looking for realism and you want it to work on modern track, it's not for you. This one's perhaps my second oldest. Again, very minimal detail. It's just a simple shell on a motor. The pros about this are, this does seem to run fine on modern track. It doesn't have like the same issues that the single wheeler had there. It doesn't crawl as well. The motor isn't up to that. It can go slow, but it doesn't do a proper crawl. The tender's very lightweight because this is entirely sort of like plastic construction. But on the plus side, it does have the motor in the Loco, and there's no traction tyres. This one, Spitfire, is quite common, so you can be picked up for not a lot of money. So I've put these two together because they're basically the same locomotive. They're both coronations, one with streamlining, one without. Again, so these have a bit more detail than the older ones, but not an awful lot, so there's no lamp irons, still quite robust. The problems with these ones though, they are tender driven, so you don't get that realism of the front wheels working, like with wheel slip or whatever. The other problem is, because they're tender driven and the tenders are not very heavy, they got those horrible pancake motors in there, that Hornby made pancake motors, ring filled, which are not pleasant to repair, especially as you might need to remove the wheels to get to the actual motor, which is quite difficult. And of course they have traction tyres, which can leave deposits and residue on your track, which means your track needs more regular cleaning. So that's something that I don't like. Hornby made a decision to go from loco driven to tender driven, which I think was a bad mistake. And also it looks unrealistic when they start off and they shunt, and the tender gets closer to the locomotive rather than the locomotive pulling away from the tender. But other than that, very cheap, quite reliable. They can't do a crawl, but they can run fairly slow, and they have no problems with points. So despite the drawbacks, these are very nice locos, and they can be picked up quite cheap as well. Okay, so I've still got the city of Hereford, but this time I've got it next to the city of Bristol. This one is slightly newer, and there are some significant changes in this that, depending on your preference, may be good, may be bad. So the first major changes, and you can probably see by the coal load that I need to redo, is the motor is in the body rather than in the tender. So it runs more realistically. It's got the heavy weight over the wheels, and importantly, it doesn't have traction tyres on it anymore, so it doesn't leave the rubber on the tracks. It can do an excellent crawl, although I don't know if this will do it. There we go. It can do a much better crawl than the ring-filled motors can, so slow speeds and control much better. It has more detail, so it has things like the lamp irons on the front and sprung buffers that this one doesn't have. There's space in the top here to actually fit a smoke generator if you want one. It will obviously be more expensive. I think you can still pick these up for a reasonable price, under 100 quid. It has glazing in the cabs, and is it robust? No, it's not robust. I mean, generally, overall, the whole thing is quite robust, but this has steps on the front here. Now that bogie swings very freely, and both steps on both sides have broken off and had to be re-glued. And because that bogie swings very freely, if I need to tip this upside down to take it apart, or just putting it on the track, that bogie can swing and knock those steps off, no problem. That's a big issue. Really annoying having to constantly glue those back on. But other than that, out of the two, I would say this is the better loco. Luckily, you can't see the glue marks because of the angle and everything. If you looked at this, you wouldn't know that it's got that problem. And also the ability to add a realistic coal load. Obviously I need to sort mine out, but it's there. None of them so far have had detailing inside the cab, apart from, just the moulded detail. None of them have actually had painted cab interiors. Another benefit of this newer locomotive is it comes with a socket, so you can DCC chip it. This one is chipped, although it's running on the analog control at the moment, which means when I send it forwards, it goes backwards. I don't know why that is. This 2P comes weathered, something that Hornby and Bachmann and others started doing earlier this century. So it comes with some lovely detail, but unfortunately this is tender driven. I have had to replace the rubber tyres on this. But one benefit is the steps on this are quite chunky, and they're clear of any freely moving parts, so they're harder to break off and they're less likely to get broken off. Okay, so these two I've put together because despite the fact that one's an A4 and the other's an A3, they are fundamentally the same. They have the exact same tender with different liveries. They have the exact same chassis underneath. A lot of the parts are the same. I mean, an A4 in real life is basically an A3 with a streamlining cover on it. Oh, no, somebody's going to be upset about that comment. But yeah, in terms of manufacturing by Hornby, they're the same. They are tender driven, so you do have these unrealistic loads. They do have more detail than other ones. So for example, they have the sprung buffers, The comparable Duchess, that is also tender driven, does not have sprung buffers, but these do have some extra little details. It's got its an etched nameplate on the side there as well, whereas this one is sheer plastic. One of the strange things is despite the similarities between the two, the Flying Scotsman does look more basic. This has glazing in the cabs, this doesn't, even though they came in very similar train sets. So it does seem like you were paying for the name on this one rather than the quality. This one is slightly better quality. Another detail that's missing, so the Flying Scotsman has this little red lump where the coupling hook would go, whereas this does actually have the coupling hook and has vacuum pipes fitted. So there's a bit more detail on this one than that one, but underneath they're both the same. The only difference is the shell and the amount of detail on the shell. Having a look at some little tank engines now. Oh, actually I need duck for this. Right, we've got duck. Okay, so these are all 060s. Nice and simple. The mechanism in these two are identical, despite that's LNER, this one's LMS, but underneath the body they're exactly the same. I don't mind that. I think that's actually a sensible idea. Nobody goes around inspecting the undercarriage of the locos that much. You're mostly looking at what's on top that's important. So I don't know why Hornby doesn't do that so much anymore. It helps keep them cheap, a bit cheaper. But nonetheless, these two are the same underneath, and they are not great as shunters. If I turn them up, turn this one up, they're a bit quite naff as runners, and they're quite noisy when they're going fast. If it goes, it's got quite a noisy motor, and for some reason Hornby decided that these needed traction tyres. They don't need traction tyres. I took the traction tyres off of this one because they broke. I didn't want to replace it. It's fiddly, difficult to replace, and it was unneeded. So this works fine without them, but they really shouldn't have changed the design that much from Duck. So Duck's a similar 060 sized engine, and he works absolutely fantastically. He has the best crawl. Oh, if I use the other controller, he has like I'll get it. Okay, here we go. Go on, Duck. Show him what you can do. Yeah, you can hear the motor. You can just about see the wheels moving. This has got the best crawl, and is a very old mechanism. And that's something. Two of the best crawlers I have, this and the Dean single wheeler, they're like the oldest they have like the oldest mechanisms, and are just outstanding in the amount of control, precision and control you can have over their speed. It's just brilliant. So as fantastic as Duck is, you will be paying the better part of £100 for him, because he's not made anymore. Hornby don't have the license to produce these. Okay, these J94s or Austerity 060s, whichever you prefer. These were originally made by Dapol, then tooling went over to Hornby. So pros and cons about these. One of the cons is people do try and rip you off. These are identical apart from some minor variations, like a slightly different bunker. This one's got a name on it, whatever. Those sort of things you would expect, but otherwise they are the same locomotive. If it's in a standard BR colour, you can pay 40 to 60 quid for one of these. Probably usually around 50-60. And then there's these ones where people claim that they're rare, but they are not rare. You do see them on eBay. I have challenged sellers on this, where I've messaged them and I've said, excuse me, but why are you charging £120 or more for this, when it should be, when it's exactly the same, and as far as I'm concerned, worth the same as that. They say because it's the only one on here at the moment, it's the only one. It's rare. It's not. That's not true. That's not true. They are. You will. This one is called Wimbledon. Wimbledon is constantly on eBay. There is usually only one on at a time, but that's the same for like ones of other numbers as well. So I would say it's like this one's taught me the lesson of don't buy what the seller's telling you. Check it, challenge it. Okay, this is no rarer than any other J94. It's more easily identifiable because when you've got a bunch of black BR ones with different numbers and everything, well, at a glance you might think they're all the same. They're not the same locomotive. They're different numbers. This is a different name, whatever. So it's not true for them if they say that this one is rarer than all the others. It's not true, and buying in on that just helps push the prices up. So I personally message people and I say, yeah, why are you charging this price for it? And I challenge them on it, and I say this should be worth whatever. You are entitled as a customer to say what you think it should be worth, and that can actually pay off. I did have sellers respond with reduced prices, not to what I was going to pay, but they will sort of like, don't be afraid to speak up to sellers and say, I don't think it's worth this much. I've done my research. That's a good tip, do your research. I think it should be worth this much. Okay, enough about the price about these, but these are, I think, fantastic locomotives. They are quite old. They're probably about 20 years old, I think, by now. Unusually, they do have sprung buffers. The other tank engines I have do not have sprung buffers. These do have sprung buffers. They have detailing, like lamp irons and handlebars and all the rest of it, handrails. But they are, and ladders, but they are unusually rugged. I have dropped, not that one, but I have dropped the others. I have dropped both of these two at numerous times, and they're absolutely fine. There's not a mark on them. The lamp irons are very thick. If I get it in shot, so you can see they're quite chunky. But I don't mind that because it means that they don't snap off. So I'm happy with that. I think there's something to be said about a bit of compromise there between, you got a choice. You can either not have the detail and it's not delicate. You can have the detail. It will look slightly unrealistic, but it will be robust, or you have the fine detail there, and if you pick it up, it will fall apart in your hands. They do have cab interiors, these, although they're not decorated, and these are just excellent shunters as well. The control on the motor for these, there's all three of them there, so there's not just one that's a standout. Got lucky with. They are all fantastic shunters, and they've got great pickup as well. That one did stall there, but I generally use these for testing track. Because I can run them over at such a slow speed. It means I can really search and find out where any dead spots are in a track, when I'm making a layout. Okay, these three together, what's great about these? They're so cheap. You can pick these up for 10 quid. This was £11. This was part of a train set, and this was £20 and part from the Collectors Club. Very cheap. Reasonably robust. This one's more robust than the other two. The funnels can snap off of those. But easily glued back on. Unlike every other model that I've got, these actually have a die-cast chassis or board, but that's probably because the main bit here in the middle is all plastic. But they're great. They're terrible shunters. They're shunting locos, but they don't do slow. doesn't exist. You know, they're known for pocket rockets as a reason. Detail wise, very simple, so hard to break. What else? One of the drawbacks, I suppose, locomotives like these came in a number of liveries. So it was in the British Railways livery, it was in Caledonian, I don't know if it was ever in Highland Railways, I forgot to check that. This was in GWR, but Hornby, because these are so small and cheap, they make them in loads of liveries. So this one in particular you can get with like nuclear power station written on the side or something, Eddie Stobart, whatever. So if you're after those novelty items, they're great. If you're after accuracy, it does mean that you have to do your research. So let's say I was doing a GWR railway, or whatever. This comes with a variety of numbers, but only one was actually ever made, 101. That's the only one that ever existed. So if you're after accuracy, they can be a bit of a trap. You can end up buying one thinking, oh yeah, this is great, and then find out that it never existed. Okay, so early 2000s, Hornby again picked this one up from Dapol, but it's a terrible runner. One of the problems with this is Hornby are selling it again now for about £80, which is, I agree with Sam's Trades, is far too much. And people selling these on eBay, the old ones, are trying to sell them for 80 quid instead of what they're really worth, which is probably about £30-40, because they are that bad. So you really have to watch out for that. It's a good idea to watch reviews of locomotives before purchasing them, because if you bought a second-hand one of these for £80 on the basis that it's rare, you would cry when you get that. It's my most modern locomotive. Now it's £100 and something normally. I got it on sale for 60 quid, so I was very happy with it. Detail wise, it's beautifully detailed, but clumsy me, oh dear, I don't think I can be trusted around this. So it's got things like glazing, it's got lots of lovely detail, very fine print that isn't available on the older locomotives, NEM couplings, lots of good stuff. It can be chipped as well, great, excellent. Cons, and for some reason it doesn't have sprung buffers, which is really weird when you consider that these do, and they're much older. These are all Dapol models. Why is this new one not got sprung buffers? What the heck's that about? The detail is very flimsy and fragile. You can see I just pinched those together there. So it would be nice if that was made of metal rather than plastic. It does have a metal chassis, similar to the little pugs, so quite heavy for its size. And apparently getting to the DCC chip under there is quite tricky. Not as easy as to chip as other locos. So I think for me, given how clumsy I am and how likely I am to break this, 60 quid was the right price. Because I would cry if I paid £110 and then it just snapped in my fingers. It does have a fantastic crawl. Alright, maybe on that list. So that's one of the things you have to be aware of as well. What controller you use does affect how well the locomotive runs. So Duck wouldn't do a crawl with this controller, but Duck does the best crawl ever with that controller, even though that controller is ones that loads of railway modelers recommend that you avoid, so sometimes it's good not to listen to them, to people doing reviews like I am right now. You find your own things out as well, what works for you. So I got this lovely what it was now, Fowler, I think it's a Fowler 24p. it has beautiful detail like the sliding cab roof. Can't add a real load to the bunker, unfortunately. It's got lots of lovely detail. Again, still no painted cab. I don't know why. Hornby just really don't like doing painted cabs. You do have this free swinging bogie that you can see has just decided to go its own way. Sometimes they really get the mechanisms for those badly wrong. That could cause damage. Fortunately, it's not been able to swing around and hit the ladders, but I am worried that it could do that. The rods here, there's a lot of rod work going on there, which is great if it looks detailed and realistic. The only problem is at some point those rods became damaged, and that caused an issue running. It came like that when I purchased it, and that was something that I had to find and fix. So the tip from this one is, when buying secondhand, make sure you inspect a locomotive carefully for any issues that might stop it from being a good locomotive. Fortunately, in this case, I was able to straighten that bar and it runs beautifully. And then last of all, these. They were about, these are really, really cheap, about 20 quid each, which is great if you're on a budget. They do not run well. They don't crawl. They use the ring-filled motors, so they have the same issues as this and this and this, because the ring-filled motors really are that crap. Pros. Oh, there we go. Unintentionally I dropped it, and am I worried? No, this thing has zero fiddly detail on it, which is great, so I can drop it like that and it will be absolutely fine. And it has working lights. What a bonus. So you don't have sprung buffers, but you do have working lights, and that's always great to see on a locomotive. Other bonus, I did a weathering job on this one, just a practice, never done it before. It's okay, but I mean, at a distance it just makes it look a little bit more realistic, having a bit of grub and grime on the locomotive. So given that this was £20, it did mean that I wasn't afraid in taking a paintbrush to this. I did use acrylics, by the way, not oil paints. Do not paint your trains with oil paints. It's a bad idea. It will look terrible and you cannot undo it. This, it was great to practice on, because pop the shell off, paint it, and because I've used acrylics, if I didn't like it, I can put it under a tap and wash it all off with a toothbrush and soapy water. So it's great for that, but otherwise it's a pretty terrible runner. It needs to get up speed. So, well, let's talk a bit about mechanisms, because it's got the ring-filled motor in. It's got rubber wheels there, and then so what it does is it picks up track from two wheels here, it picks up track from two wheels here. What am I saying? It picks up electricity from the track from two wheels on this side, and then two wheels on this side for the other side of the track, which means that this basically has no more pickups than this. So these are famous for stopping on things like the plastic frogs on points, any bit of dirt on the track, oil, grease. So you might think because this has 8 wheels it's going to be better. It will not be. The ring-filled motors are a terrible idea, and picking up something like this, which is an 040, which is a Bobo layout. This is just an 040, just with the wheels spaced apart. So that, again, is something to consider. You wouldn't want to pay lots of money for an old Hornby diesel with a ring-filled motor with traction tyres, because it won't do crawls. This is a freight loco or whatever, so it won't do crawls, and it will stop on points, and it generally sounds a bit horrible as well. Oh, look at that, it's fighting me there. It's Oh, for once it's actually keen to get going. And then, and then it stopped. Oh, you are a naughty engine. There we go. Off it goes. At least the light works. Yeah, I'm being a bit mean on this one. I do actually really like Class 25s. But yeah, and yeah, and the magnet is harder to change because it's a ring-filled motor. The magnet's in a circle. It's very hard to get out and change. With something like this, you can actually recharge those magnets or buy a Neo magnet off eBay. One screw, pop the magnet out, put the new one in. It's fixed. £10. You got a working Loco again. These ones you probably just buy a whole motor for a couple of quid. And you know, quite easy to swap over, resolder or whatever. But these are much harder. And if you don't know, people actually take the motors from CD trays and swap them over in this. They get a 3D printed adapter to go in the holder for the motor, and they swap these out because they're so bad. Everything we looked at so far was a Hornby or Triang. This is one that I have that isn't. This is, or previously made by Dapple. This is mainline locomotive, now owned by Bachmann. Great thing about this is it's quite tough, quite rugged. It still has a nice amount of detail. Looks quite realistic, I suppose. You don't have things like glazing. You've got lovely metal wheels. This is Loco driven, which is a big plus. The motor in it is okay. It can go slow. This, again, controller choice matters. Works better on this controller than on the newer controller. I think it's something to do with whether or not it's a feedback controller or something. The downside about this is if you want to DCC this, complete nightmare. This has a chassis that's split into two pieces of metal like that. The electricity passes up through the chassis, through the motor, and then down through the other side. Which means that if you want to DCC this, you have to use plastic screws to stop the motor, to insulate the motor. Do a lot of soldering, and you have to take an angle grinder to the chassis to cut out space to put the chip, because the chassis fills the entire locomotive. But otherwise, a great buy. This was 30 quid. I think I bought another one for £40 or £35, something like that. Really cheap. Great. Once they were cleaned up, they ran really well. Okay, now I'm going to go for the last thing. I'm going to go back to the Flying Scotsman. So, identifiable by the sprung buffers and also lack of detail, such as windows or cab or anything like that, and having a stupid ring-filled motor. This can actually go quite fast. It will go fast enough to throw itself off the tracks. At least that's something that's good about it. It can do the speed. So these locomotives made 20 years ago or so. You have to be really careful. You've got to watch out for mazac rot. So this one has mazac rot. Fortunately, it's only got it in the bogie, not in the body. So I can buy a replacement one of these for 5-10 quid. One screw, change it over, job done. It will be back to normal. But you do need to make sure that if you're buying these older tender-driven locomotives, you check photos very carefully. If you're buying on eBay or in the shop, you pick it up and you turn it upside down and you check for mazac rot. This one has got it. At the moment, it's not got to the point where it's actually noticeable. If you were buying this in the shop, you'd probably pick that up and think it's okay, but then when you look closer, you actually see the crack. So watch out for that. I hope you've all found this video useful, and I'll see you again soon.